Alrighty, YouTube, Niner Empire, what is going down? Welcome back to another video. So a lot of questions regarding Brandon Aiyuk over the past couple days, really starting over the past week. All eyes will be on Brandon Aiyuk's contract situation this offseason. The Niners cleaned out their locker rooms last week, and reporters asked Brandon Aiyuk if he hopes to remain with the Niners, to which he replied, if that's the right move, then yes. And ever since that, there has been reporters running with that, making articles about how the Niners may not be able to retain him due to the salary cap situation and this and that. And obviously the right move to what Brandon Aiyuk is talking about is securing a contract extension that will pay him among the highest paid receivers in the entire NFL. And obviously the Niners have already invested significantly into Deebo Samuel, but the biggest question is going to be, if they're going to be able to afford to retain both of them. And here's the thing: I've seen a lot of Niners fans, and this could be out of emotion, but I've seen a lot of Niners fans talking about how if it comes down to it, they need to trade Deebo Samuel and pay Brandon Aiyuk. I've seen a lot of people talk about how Deebo was very good in the system with Jimmy Garoppolo, but now that the Niners have Brock Purdy, who actually is a good quarterback and can throw the ball downfield, and actually a quarterback we can look at as the franchise. He is the franchise. There's no question about that anymore. But I've seen a lot of people talking about how Deebo was very good for this system when Jimmy G was around because Jimmy was very limited. But with Brock Purdy, obviously, Brandon Aiyuk's coming off of the best season of his career, and Brandon Aiyuk and Brock Purdy have built this connection that, is slim to none, and they've built that all this year. But, I mean, anybody saying that the Niners should trade Deebo Samuel needs to be traded to a different fan base. I don't know why anybody in their right mind would want Deebo Samuel out. And I think this is a lot of this is based off of emotion, considering Deebo didn't have the best game in the Super Bowl. But at the same time, man, Brandon Aiyuk didn't have the best game either. George Kittle had a very underwhelming game. There were a lot of offensive players that had a very underwhelming game in the Super Bowl. And at the end of the day, man, it's like, it is what it is, right? Am I over this Super Bowl loss yet? No. I don't think I'll ever will be. It's the worst loss that I'll ever have to overcome. It's still gut-wrenching just thinking about what happened in the Super Bowl. And I don't really want to talk about it no more because there's no need to talk about it. I know a lot of people are talking about, what if this happened and what if that happened and this and that. Save it, man. At the end of the day, you can talk about it all you want, but those results won't change. We lost the Super Bowl. It's the third Super Bowl loss in 12 years, and it sucks. Yeah, it's still gut-wrenching. I mean, I hate even thinking about it. But we have to move on. And again, I don't think I'm going to ever move on from that. I'm going to act like I've moved on, that's for sure. I'm going to, try to not think about it. But look, man, at the end of the day, again, Niners fans talking about us trading Deebo Samuel in order to keep Brandon Aiyuk, save it, man. There's no reason for you to be going on there talking about who they should trade and who they shouldn't trade. And what Deebo has did for this team since he's been with the 49ers is slim to none. Obviously, he hasn't had a season like he did 2 years ago, and I believe 2022, where he had an historic season. But Niners fans, we have to realize that we have Christian McCaffrey now. So what Deebo Samuel did that year, he's not going to ask to replicate that. He's not going to ask to live up to what he did in that season. He doesn't need to. We have Christian McCaffrey now. The Niners, are they still going to run him? Absolutely, but when you have a guy like Christian McCaffrey, when you have the best running back in the National Football League, Deebo Samuel is not going to have to do as much as he did that year where he put up historic numbers. But either way, that's beside the point. I just had to get that off my chest because Deebo is one of my favorite players on this team. And I hate that just because he had an underwhelming game in the Super Bowl, people are trying to bring him down. And players or fans want him out of the door. And I'm not even going to answer, like, there may be comments on here that talk about, like, if you could keep one, which one would you keep? I'm not even going to answer that because there's no need to. My answer doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, I want to keep them both. I don't want to get rid of one to keep the other one. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna talk on that. I don't need to. At the end of the day, man, like, you got to trust what Kyle and John Lynch are going to do with the roster, and if that means trading Brandon Aiyuk or trading Deebo Samuel, it's going to suck. It's definitely going to suck knowing that we had them on our team all these years, and we, both of those, well, Deebo was with us for, the past 2 Super Bowl losses. Brandon Aiyuk, obviously, this was his first Super Bowl loss of his career, but, yeah, man, like, at the end of the day, nobody should be answering if we had to keep one, which one should we keep. Like, none of that matters, dude. Like, none of it. I'm not going to answer that question. I don't need to. Nobody needs to answer that question. The Niners, I can tell you this right now, the Niners will do everything in their power to keep both of those guys, and Deebo and Brandon Aiyuk have built, this relationship that's bigger than football. And I know Brandon Aiyuk wants to stick around, but at the same time, he's going to want paid, rightfully so. He's coming off of, the best season of his career. And Brandon Aiyuk also is knows his worth, and he's going to make sure that, whatever decision he makes, it's best for him and best for really him only. And he has the absolute right to do that. Again, I mean, he was arguably one of our best offensive players this season, and he deserves to be paid. So, obviously, with Brandon Aiyuk, though, he's entering his 5th season in the NFL. The Niners exercised the 5th-year option for the receive, obviously keeping him under contract through the end of the 2024 season. Now, if the team's decision makers hope to retain him, they will aim to obviously secure Brandon Aiyuk to a long-term deal before training camp. Now, Dan Graziano of ESPN is reporting, and he's speculating that Brandon Aiyuk's cost might be too high for the 49ers to manage, and Graziano believes that Aiyuk might even request a trade to a team that can obviously better afford to offer him a long-term contract. Now, Graziano wrote and said, I do know that it's not going to be easy for the Niners to extend him, and that other wide receivers in similar situations in recent years, such as Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown, have asked to be traded and, have gotten their wish. Now, obviously, a couple years ago, Deebo did the same thing, but the Niners were in a situation where they were able to pay him. But the thing with Brandon Aiyuk is Deebo's making roughly $24 million a year, and if you think Brandon Aiyuk is not going to make more than him, you're crazy. Like, Brandon Aiyuk, if he's going to be re-signed, he is going to make every bit of $25 million plus a year. And it will be tough for the Niners to figure out what they're going to have to do to re-sign him. But obviously right now the Niners are currently approximately $12.3 million over the salary cap, and they're going to need to make some, financial adjustments if they intend to keep Brandon Aiyuk. But at the same time, man, like, they must consider the future. After the 2024 season, Brock Purdy's contract situation will become a significant obstacle. And they're in a very sticky situation right now, and that's why, man, like, last year I said video after video after video, this is the Niners' year to win the Super Bowl. They have to get it done. This roster will not stick around forever. They got to to the dance, and they fell short once again. And now they're in a situation where they're probably never going to have that talented of a roster. Does that mean they can't win a Super Bowl? Absolutely not. But they're never going to have the roster that they had, last year. It was by far one of the greatest and most talented rosters in NFL history. And unfortunately, that team will be talked about as, maybe a top 5 team of all time, a top 5 most talented team of all time that never got over the hump and won a Super Bowl. But obviously, if it came down to it and Brandon Aiyuk, unfortunately, was traded, he would surely be missed. But with all the massive cap numbers, the Niners are projecting, their veterans in 2024 and in future years. At some point, obviously, they're going to need to move on from some of their stars. Obviously, if they could get a first-rounder back in a Brandon Aiyuk trade and use it to replace him at wide receiver, that might actually be the best way to go. Obviously, going back to what I said at the beginning of this video, not everybody believes that Brandon Aiyuk would be the one traded. One 49ers insider suggests that the team would prefer to retain Brandon Aiyuk over Deebo Samuel, potentially leading to Deebo's trade. And with Deebo Samuel, he's going to be a free agent after next season. He only signed a 3-year deal just two seasons ago. But what this 49ers insider basically said is if it came down to Deebo Samuel or Brandon Aiyuk, I think they would probably go with Brandon Aiyuk because he's on the same page as Brock Purdy. He said, we saw that chemistry all year long. They seemed perfect for each other. They seemed made for each other. Whereas Deebo, had some absolutely terrific games this year, but it didn't seem to have the same passing chemistry that Brandon Aiyuk had with Brock Purdy. And obviously, too, a lot of Deebo's yards were short passes that, he created yards after catch. But yeah, man, I mean, we are very much so in a sticky situation. Like, we could restructure contracts of high-priced players like Trent Williams, like Deebo, like Eric Armstead, like Fred Warner to kind of ease financial constraints. And that might work. The Niners might free up enough with restructuring some of these guys to be able to retain Brandon Aiyuk. But Graziano basically concluded and said, to me, the most likely way this shakes out is Aiyuk ends up getting traded to a team where he's the clear number 1 wide receiver and he can get the extension he wants, leaving the Niners to draft his replacement in the first round. That's the cleanest way for them to address all of their other needs. I see San Francisco extending Talanoa Hufanga and coming to some sort of agreements with or some sort of arrangements with Kyle Juszczyk and Dre Greenlaw that keep them guys both around. So, yeah, man, again, like the Niners are in a situation where that last year was their year to win it. Like, there will never be a better year for the Niners to win the Super Bowl than there was just last year, and it pains me to say that, because at the end of the day, like, again, I feared coming on here after February 11th or February 12th, whichever day the Super Bowl was, but I feared coming on here talking about, for one, losing the Super Bowl, but for two, talking about in the offseason how talented this team was to not win a Super Bowl. And what do you know? I mean, now we're in a situation where that has came to fruition, and unfortunately, all offseason long, I'm going to be talking about how talented the roster was and how bad it will sting for a very, very long time that we didn't win the Super Bowl. So, sticky situation, though, man. It'll be interesting to see how the Niners, how this thing pans out, what happens with Brandon Aiyuk, if they're able to restructure some of the high-priced players that we currently have, if they're able to come to some sort of agreement to keep Brandon Aiyuk around. But, right now it's looking like it's given me deja vu of a couple years ago when Deebo Samuel was wanting to get paid. But I mean, since then, man, like we went out and we got Christian McCaffrey, we got Chase Young, and it's like we did these moves to go out and win the big game, the Super Bowl. And I'm not gonna lie, like if it came down to it, where Brandon Aiyuk was traded, and we won the Super Bowl, just a couple weeks ago, it would have made it much more easier for me to understand that, that we can't pay him and this and that, but we didn't win the Super Bowl, and obviously, no matter what happens with this Brandon Aiyuk thing, like he will dearly be missed if he is on his way out. And again, like it wouldn't have been as bad, I think, as had we won that Super Bowl, because as for me personally, as a fan, like obviously you want to see your team win multiple Super Bowls, but like I would have been very, very content as a fan in the direction of wherever this team heads had we won that Super Bowl. I mean, I would have been kind of had my feet kicked up, completely content with whatever happens this season and next season and maybe even the season after had we just won that Super Bowl. But we didn't, man. And now we're in a situation where we may only get worse, and teams like Kansas City only may get better. And it's scary to think about. And I'm not going to sit up here and say that we're going to get significantly worse, right? Like, again, we can lose Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel, or we could lose a couple key pieces here and there, and we can very well still be in the mix to win a Super Bowl. Matter of fact, we will still be Super Bowl contenders no matter what. But at the end of the day, like, this team will never be good as what it was last year, and it's one of those things where that stings saying. I mean, that stings just kind of putting that in words and understanding that. But at the end of the day, man, like I'm trusting Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. Those guys are masterminds behind it all, and whatever happens, happens. But at the end of the day, Niners fans, we have to stop, painting this narrative that Deebo should be gone before Brandon Aiyuk or vice versa. Like, at the end of the day, we want to keep both of those guys around. Like, both of those guys are elite at what they do. And, again, I'm not going to sit up here and say that I'd rather keep Brandon Aiyuk over Deebo, or I'd rather keep Deebo over Brandon Aiyuk. Like, none of that matters. Because at the end of the day, that's just an opinion that nobody really gives a damn about. And, I'm not going to add on to this speculation going around and add on to this talk going around. So, has the farthest I'll go is probably to say, like, has Brandon Aiyuk, shown that he could probably do a little more with Brock Purdy in this offense? Absolutely. But I think that just goes to show that Brandon Aiyuk has been the number one true wide receiver of this team since he's been drafted. Does Brandon Aiyuk have a little better chemistry with Brock Purdy? I don't know. I mean, I think you could probably argue that. I think you could say that. But I'm not going to discredit Deebo. Like, there were so many situations where Brandon Aiyuk was having off games and Deebo Samuel stepped up and made things happen. And obviously that didn't happen in the Super Bowl. But, at the end of the day, man, like whatever happens, happens. Obviously I'm going to continue to keep you guys updated on the situation, and it's going to be a long off season. But, yeah, man, I mean, we'll see what happens. We'll see how this thing kind of shakes out. But, again, I mean, the salary cap situation could put the Niners in a situation where they are forced to consider trading Brandon Aiyuk. And it sucks, but, that's the reality of, the business side of the NFL. And the Niners had their chance to win it last year, and they fell short. And now they're going to have to face some of these situations and some of these hard they're going to have to face some of these hard consequences of not winning the Super Bowl and potentially moving on from some of their veteran players. So I'll keep you guys updated. We'll see what happens. But yeah, man, as always, go Niners. I'll see you guys in the next one.